Hi, this is Dr. Susan Brown at the Center for Better Bones. It's my pleasure to be with you again today to talk about bone health, particularly about stress and osteoporosis. The mission of the Center for Better Bones is to explore the capacity to maintain excellent bone health lifelong and to regenerate bone at any stage of life. What we're really talking about is being fracture free for our whole lives. And in order to really develop strong bones for our entire life, we really have to move from thinking about bone itself to thinking about the whole body. Because bone health is really a whole body issue. And in fact, it's an issue of the mind and the body. And in further fact, the mind and the body are really not separate units, but one single unit. A unit of intelligence and information that's flowing through the body. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, try to get a glimpse of the amazing nature of the human body, of the terrific flow of intelligence and information, and how that all relates to brain functioning and to stress, and then how stress really can affect bone health. In the Better Bones program, we really generally most often talk about the material aspects of bone health. The nutritional supplements we should use, the alkaline diet, the kinds of foods that are really superfoods for bone health, the sorts of exercises we do to physically enhance our strength of our muscles and of our bones. We talk about material features as a rule, but today we're going to talk about the non-material features, these questions of energy, information, and these questions of thought. How thought, which relates to emotions, and then how the emotions, another non-material factor, converts itself into chemicals and actually physical changes within the bone. As we think about it, we know that thoughts and emotions can be either on the conscious level or on the unconscious level. And when we talk about stress and osteoporosis, we're often talking about an unconscious stimulation of emotion, of thought, that then produces a cascade of chemicals that can affect bone. And it's kind of fun to take just a few minutes and explore how this all happens. None of us plan consciously, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be anxious, or I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be angry. Those are automatic reactions that happen to us when certain neural pathways, certain pathways in the brain are stimulated, and often because these pathways have been established in childhood. Just for example, if my mother had a severe accident and the ambulance rushed to the house when I was a little kid and I was terribly afraid I was going to lose my mother, every time I hear an ambulance, I might automatically, without thinking, trigger into this fear response, a response that sets off a chemical cascade that eventually ends up even down affecting bone. Now we'll take a minute and just walk through some illustrations of that cascade, very simplified, just because it's so really fascinating. But most of these emotional responses are unconscious, and one of our challenges is to recognize that we're being reactive, we're being stimulated unconsciously, and to move towards the deliberate creation of different neural pathways and different thoughts that establish neural pathways. It reminds us of the old saying, one of my favorite sayings from Deepak Chopra, is that nothing holds more power over the body than thoughts held in the mind. And so part of our attempt is to become more aware of the thoughts we hold in our mind and how they might affect our bones, as well as becoming aware of those unconscious reactions that pop up. Every time somebody insults me, I might fly into a big upset because I have that pathway. Or every time I hear people argue, I might have had that experience as a child that whenever people started arguing, I was going to get beat up. So I tend to have a strong reaction to flee from that. We'll see. It's actually very interesting, these old pathways and how they're stimulated and how they affect our life today. And most interesting is the fact that neuroscience now shows we can establish new pathways within the brain. The brain is much more plastic than they'd ever thought. And the top concept today is neuroplasticity. We can change these brain patterns, and so much of them are deeply embedded and automatic within us. So, for example, well, one example is with golf. This is a really kind of interesting example, but I like to play golf. I'm not a particularly good golfer, but so I take a class, and the teacher is showing me that I don't hold the golf club properly. You know, like, for example, there's a way you hold a baseball bat, and I grew up playing baseball, so I like to do a baseball swing. But he was telling me the ball's not going to go straight if you do that you have to have another grip. You have to hold your hands a different way. And it's so fascinating. This golf grip is almost impossible for me to change. I'll take the grip and I'll swing back, and I just want to change that grip. I have like a pathway established that the way I swing is with a baseball grip. And finally, what I had to do was to get a golf club that has an automatic, you have to hold the grip in a particular way because of the way it's formed, just as a training grip. And so I am, in this simple fashion, creating a new neural pathway of how my body is going to respond when I have that golf club in my hand. To me, that's a lot of fun, and I'm so amazed at how many times I tell myself I'm going to grip it differently. When I take that club back, I automatically want to change the grip. I bet you'll find other interests in other little aspects of your life like this, that you're aware that your automatic reaction is not the best one, but we have to work to create a new neural pathway. So this brings us to the brain. And let's talk about the brain for a second, because, you know, the ancients would say that we are sparks of divine intelligence. And when we study the brain, we can understand the beauty and the magnificence of the human body. And maybe that will help us to take a little better care of this human body. The brain is actually just weighs 2% of all our body weight, yet it uses 20% of all the oxygen, 20 to 25% of all the oxygen and all the energy. A great lot of activities going on in the brain. There's 100 billion brain cells. These are called neurons. This is a little picture of a neuron. It's a little brain cell here, and it's got these little bodies that come out, these dendrites, these little bodies that come out, and they communicate with other brain cells. And they communicate via what they call a synapsis. A certain point here is a juncture where a message is sent from this neuron to this neuron. It goes through the synapse, and it goes to the next neuron. Now, we have 100 billion of these neurons. If you sat down in your little brain, if you sat down to count those neurons, it would take you 3,000 years. There's so many of them to count these neurons in the brain. 100 billion of them. Each neuron has 40,000 synapses. So each one of these cells has 40,000 synapses, which send signals. And the synapse can take 1/1000th of a second to send a message from here to here. It's almost to imagine the capacity of it. One brain cell, the size of a grain of sand, that's like a little dot on the paper, the size of a grain of sand, contains 100,000 neurons, 100,000 of these, with 1 billion synapses. And each of these are communicating with each other. So this is where we clearly see that the body, we think the body is material flesh and bones, but if you go deep enough, you see that it's a field of information and intelligence. Intelligence that coordinates all this, and information that is moving faster than we can even imagine. Through these neural pathways that are established with neurons communicating with one another, and they remember, wow, they remember the sound of an ambulance is associated with you're losing your mother. And deep-seated pathways are established, and our goal is going to be and some of these pathways can produce a stress response that's very damaging to bone. And so one of the things we want to do is to actually establish new neural pathways. Okay, so this is the image of the brain cell. And let's take a second and just try to understand how it is that this orchestration from the brain comes down to affect the organs that we know most directly impact bone, like the adrenals. So you have this brain that we talked about before. This is a brain full of these neurons having pathways, communicating with one another. Some parts of the brain are called like the very old brain, the actually attached right to the brainstem, what we call the very earliest reptilian brain, that this regulates the automatic functionings, like blood pressure, like heartbeat, all those sorts of things are automatically related by this part of the brain, the reptilian brain. We don't have any control over it. The limbic system is this part of the brain here, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary. The limbic system is what responds to emotions. That's where we get imprinted this emotional imprint. Oh, the ambulance, that means some danger to me. Or when I hear these loud noises, I'm liable to get beat up. This is the limbic system. And the limbic system is important for survival. And certainly when a tiger was on your tail, you wanted to be able to quickly respond. You didn't think about, well, should I get out of here or not? It's an automatic response. We're going to see that, of course, many of these are beneficial for survival. But what we find out today is many of us live like they were a tiger on our tail, all the while when there's really not. And we stay in a constant state of stress response. So there's the limbic system, which is the emotional part, the response of the brain. There's the older brain that really is the automatic things, like we don't think about breathing, we don't think about blood pressure. They're all done automatically, all orchestrated very carefully by this part of the brain, the lower part of the brain. Then you have what they call the new brain, the cerebellum, and this is your thinking brain. Now, of course, everything I'm saying is very simplistic, but it's just going to give us a rough idea. So this new brain, the cortex is where we think. We say, oh, wow, I'm feeling anxious. Let's consider that. Let's reconsider. Can I feel some other way? Can I get to the cause of my anxiety? This is the thinking brain, not automatic at all. So the stress response and how we get back to bone on all of this and how you end up with bone damage from all this is that we have these neurons carrying all sorts of reactions, and we're going to look particularly at the limbic system, the emotional responses. We have an emotional response. We have a fear. We have a worry that pops up related to something, a pathway that was established long ago. This sends out a message to the hypothalamus, which is in this limbic system, that is triggered to send out hormones, what they're called corticotrophin releasing hormones that then affect the pituitary, and in turn the pituitary sends a signal to the adrenal gland. To the adrenal gland saying, look, we're in a really tough situation, there's a crisis here, you must start producing more cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone we're most familiar with. The hormone that says we got to get out of here. We have got to stop digesting. We have got to produce a lot of sugar. We've got to break down muscle so we can get ready to either do fight or flight. This is what gears up the body. You've probably heard famous stories of, say, a woman whose child is stuck under a motorcycle and she's able to lift it up because the energy has superhuman strength due to this cortisol. And we know, of course, and we've probably all had a near accident where we get this jolt of stress hormones, and when that passes, we're like shaky and weak. We can't stay forever in this state. High cortisol, in turn, is very damaging to bone. There's many mechanisms by which cortisol damage bones. And as I mentioned to you in another discussion about bone drugs, steroids that we take, cortisol, substances we take like prednisone, actually have a direct impact on reducing the bone building cells the activity of the osteoblast and the number of osteoblasts is effective. While on the other hand, the bone breakdown cells, the osteoclasts, are increased when we have high cortisol. And what researchers now know, it's not just cortisol that we take as a medicine. It's also we can produce enough cortisol within our own bodies due to this stress response to actually damage bone. And one of the mechanisms we're looking at is that this cortisol not only directly affects the bone building cells and limits their activity, but it also encourages the production of inflammatory markers, inflammatory substances like interleukin 6. And here at the Center for Better Bones, we're looking at interleukin 6 levels in individuals to see if we can assess how much the stress response is really affecting bone. Interleukin 6 is one of these inflammatory substances that directly is associated with bone loss. So you see how a thought in the mind or even a memory can trigger a whole cascade of reactions through the hypothalamus, through the pituitary, down to the adrenals. And we've probably all heard of the importance of good adrenal health. We've heard about adrenal exhaustion. The adrenals are really where the tire hits the road. It's where our body has to respond to stress. It's our survival mechanisms, but too many times we call on this cortisol. We have cortisol at very high levels. And this relates to tissue breakdown, to sleep problems, to questions with energy production, not only the damage to bone. So this cascade, there's one other way to look at it. Let's just look at it for a second, but it all starts with the brain, the amazing brain. We can have pathways that have been established that are not particularly beneficial, reactions that occur to us. We can also create new pathways. And what we're going to talk about in a second is some simple ways to quiet down this stress response and actually begin to create new neural pathways, to use that great plasticity of the human brain to our own advantage. Just for 1 second, I know this may seem like a drop back to your biology class, but let's just take 1 second, because I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, like every other day somebody asks me, could it be that stress is causing my osteoporosis? And now I've always said yes, because I have studied ancient sciences like ancient Ayurveda, ancient sciences of traditional Chinese medicine. These are 4,000 years old sciences, and they all say that every dysfunction in the body begins with emotional distress. And that's because the emotions have such a powerful impact on this refined complex of interactions between the body and the mind, and these body-mind interactions. And just to kind of summarize them, you have the stress that stimulates the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then sets up a hormone to produce these releasing hormones that are going to affect the adrenals. They're called corticotrophic releasing hormone. And then the hypothalamus in turn produces other hormones, growth hormone, these hormones that stimulate the adrenal cortical hormones. These hormones from the hypothalamus go on to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. And you've probably heard of the sympathetic nervous system. You have the sympathetic, so many controls of the nerves that are done by either the sympathetic nervous system and its part, the parasympathetic. The sympathetic establishes the fight or flight. It says, got to get out of here. We either got to fight or flight. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic system, which says it's time to rest and digest, to relax and digest. If we're under stress, the last thing we want to do is digest. We want to mobilize. We don't want to spend energy digestion. We want to spend our energy on trying to survive, to meet that crisis. Anyway, the end of it is you have hormones that tell the adrenal to release the steroids. The end of it is that you have a high steroid production. Even the sex hormones are decreased as we go through the stress response. And the impact on the osteoblast is, as we said, that there's damage to bone formation. So stress can certainly affect bone formation. And if you ever wondered if stress is a cause of your osteoporosis, I can say it certainly is possible. And so that brings us to the question, well, how can we possibly quiet down the stress response? And I bet many of you already know many of the answers. So let's just think about it. The blog that I wrote recently was on tips for dealing with anxiety. You know, it's sort of interesting. Over the years, I've seen many women where there's such a considerable anxiety that seems to be linked with bone loss. And in fact, this is particularly true amongst thin women. And we're working on a whole theory of this, but if you're thin or heavy, it doesn't matter. Anxiety is a really one form of fear, and that's very damaging to bone. And I would just say I know a lot about anxiety because I myself have had that experience, and I know what it's like to be worried. For example, worried about anything. You can be worried that your child's going to get in an accident. You can be worried that you might eat bad food in a restaurant. You can be worried that someone will die. It's a situation of excessive worry. And as you know, if you have experienced anxiety, it's very distracting to our life. It takes our energy away. It takes our focus away because our mind might go from one thing to the next, always worrisome. The mind, we have about 70,000 thoughts a day. It's suggested that 95% of them we had yesterday. And it's also suggested that perhaps 70% of them are negative thoughts. And so our question is, can we become a little more control instead of going to these automatic triggered responses? Like nobody goes to bed saying, tomorrow I'm going to wake up anxious. I think it'll be really fun to do that. Or I'm going to wake up tomorrow really upset. But we get that way as we go through the day, as those brain pathways, those old brain pathways often laid down in childhood get triggered. And so how do we begin quieting that response down? Quieting in particular the anxiety response down, and even going as far as establishing new neural pathways like I'm trying to do with my golf club. So one of the first things that we mentioned in the blog, and you'll see it in this week's Better Bones, Better Body blog, was this whole concept of first becoming aware. The body is a field of energy and information, and awareness is our great capacity that humans have to really increase our understanding of what's going on. So we're aware, oh yes, I am feeling anxiety. And we remember to stress that I am feeling anxiety. The energy of anxiety is moving through me. Not that I am anxious. My being is not anxious. It's an energy that's moving through you. So the first thing is to become aware, but not to become so tightly identified that you begin to thinking that you are anxious, rather you're experiencing anxiety. There's a big difference between that. And one of the first steps, as I mentioned in the blog, is to slow down. So we step back and say, I realize I'm anxious. So we maybe take a few deep breaths, and then we create a space, a little bit of a space between me and that anxiety. We can get a little space and we notice I'm feeling anxious. This is not necessarily me. This is not my being. This is an energy that's going through me. And indeed, one of the first exercises that all the scientists who talk about the stress response have documented is the value of slowing down, and particularly slowing down the breath. You see, when we breathe deeply and slowly, we stimulate the parts of the nervous system that are relaxing. We stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. We stimulate the vagus nerve. A lot of quieting physiological things happen within the body. And in fact, that is really one of the most important things. So maybe what we'll do in the last few minutes here, let's just do a little exercise. Because one of the ways that you can detect the level of stress the body's under, stress that you might not even be aware of, stress that may be just a deep-seated response to modern day life. One way we can notice this is by paying attention, becoming more observant of our breath. And you'll notice in the program for Better Bones, the Better Bones, Better Body program, this is so important that I've even produced CDs, a meditation CD, which is basically breathing exercises, how to breathe in a way that quiets down the nervous system, quiets down the stress response. Let's do this one little exercise, and then in another video, we can talk about some of the ways that you can begin your own program to establish new neural pathways, to set new goals. Like, I do want to wake up tomorrow being kind and being caring. And I want to wake up being resilient and being able to have tough situations come my way, but not throw me off kilter. We can talk about that if you'd like. But for now, I think a really fun thing would be to do this little brief, kind of a little test with the breathing. So what I'm going to suggest is we just sit comfortably for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to time us. And what I suggest, let's see, we got a minute here. Let's take 1 minute. And I want you to just breathe like you normally would breathe. And in fact, I'll tell you what, we'll just do it 30 seconds. I'm going to time it. I'm going to tell you when to begin. You just do your regular everyday breathing. Don't try to deliberately deep breathe slowly. We'll do that in a second, but just do your everyday breathing. And let's see how many breaths you might actually have in 30 seconds, and then we'll duplicate that for a minute. This is a very interesting thing. So we just sit comfortably. We don't try to breathe slowly, but we'll just kind of do our regular breath. Okay, so let's start. And we'll just breathe, kind of count the breaths to yourself. Your normal breaths, just as you breathe. Just easy breathing. Okay, so that's 30 seconds. And you might check how many breaths did you have. Multiply it times 2. Say if you had 5 breaths, you multiply it times 2, that's 10. If you're in the average state, the kind of a little bit automatically stressed state, you might have 10, even 15 breaths. If you're in a relaxed state, you may have 5, 6, 7 breaths a minute. So now, as we get ready to, as we get ready to close this session, let's just take another second, kind of remember how many breaths you had in those 30 seconds, multiply them by 2. And now let's take a minute where we stretch out a little, we intentionally relax the body. I always like to stretch a little because it gets me feeling a little more comfortable. We take a nice, easy breath. You just relax for 1 second. I'll see if I can get this timer to work with us. And we're going to do another minute of breathing exercises. Let's just see. Let's just see if we can do this for 1 minute. And what we don't force ourselves, but the attempt is to breathe in a relaxed fashion. And the idea then, as you go through your day, you might say, hey, can I note once in a while, am I breathing in a comfortable, released fashion or not? We want to breathe deep into the abdomen because that's what stimulates the nervous system to quiet down. We breathe through our nose, we inhale and exhale. And if you're interested, I have produced a CD which has 5 different of these breathing exercises on it and meditations. You can look into that on the betterbones.com website. Okay, so let's sit comfortably and let's take 1 minute, because what a great way to close this session, to do a relaxing 1 minute breathing exercise. And you might notice As you exhale, you might notice that little quiet, that little gap after the exhalation. You might enjoy that quietness. Just pause for an instant after the exhalation. Okay, let's give it a try. So we sit comfortably. We just breathe in gently and deeply into the abdomen. A big breath into the abdomen. And then we exhale gently. We don't force it, but we breathe in gently and we exhale gently. We relax by putting our attention on the breath, what it feels like to breathe in deeply, what it feels like to exhale deeply. We let the body do its process of maintaining life and bringing oxygen all by itself automatically, but we just attempt to do it in the most relaxed fashion and with the deepest breath that's comfortable for us. Great, that's fine. So then we stop and we say, how many breaths did I have? How many breaths did I have? And you might do it at home to time yourself. How many breaths you might have in a second, in a minute. And in fact, it's a really great exercise once in a while during your regular work day or your day to just sit for a minute and say, let me do some deep breaths. Let me do 2 or 3 minutes of deep breaths. You will quiet down the nervous system. You'll quiet your stress response. And if you want, you will notice that when you're really stressed, you're breathing much more quickly and more shallow breaths. I personally am totally fascinated with the amazing quality of intelligence and information that flows through the body. And to me, it's a lot of fun to learn about this, because if we accept the body as bone and muscle and tissue, we miss the point that there's a supreme field of intelligence and information, and that we are indeed divine beings with a divine intelligence within us. The more we know about it, the more we respect that intelligence and use that intelligence. It's my pleasure being with you. I hope you all join us next Thursday. We're going to try at Thursdays at 12:30 on Facebook to chat about issues in our blog and other issues of importance to you. If you have questions or issues you'd like us to discuss, be sure to let me know. Let me see, there is a couple of questions here. Let's see if we can answer anything before we close. This is interesting. Rosemary mentions that she developed osteoporosis in the 50th year of her life, which was the most stressful time of her life, and she could feel it was happening. I now have calmed down and follow an alkaline diet, and my numbers are not bad now. That's a really interesting case. Thanks, Rosemary. That's a very interesting case. We can feel the stress. And you know what? It isn't nearly as much fun to be stressed as it is to be relaxed and resilient. And it definitely affects your bones, just like in Rosemary's case. Someone asked, some people are thanking us, and someone asked, what is an alkaline diet? Right now, I'm not going to go into it. An alkaline diet is a diet high in fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, but we have all kinds of information on the betterbones.com website and on the Alkaline for Life website. And most of all, because an alkaline diet is so central to bone health, I've produced a pH test kit, which has the book I wrote on acid-base balance. It has sample menus. It has how to test to see if your diet is alkaline. It even has the pH paper. So, Marie, you might just give our office a ring or go on betterbones.com, or go better yet to alkalineforlife.com. You can get our pH test kit and read all about it, and also see on our website. It's been great fun being with you all once again. You have a great week, and we'll have some more fun next week. Okay, take care. Bye now.